I want to tell you about one of our customers' recent deals that should have closed. The product was solid, the champion was engaged, they're asking good questions, following up, forwarding emails, even the demo went well. By every signal we had, this was real. And then it just stopped. There's no hard no, no budget freeze, no competing priority we had to point to, just silence. And then eventually a very polite email saying they're just going to hold off for now. I've seen this pattern more times than I can count. And for a long time, I thought the answer was somewhere in the sales process. Better discovery, stronger follow-up, a tighter demo, more urgency. But I eventually landed on a different diagnosis. You see, the product wasn't hard to use, it was hard to buy. And that's when I realized a lot of software companies are trying to fix the wrong problem. You see, the champion understood what the product did. She may have even wanted it. But when she walked into a room with her CFO, she couldn't build the case. She couldn't answer the questions that mattered most to an executive, and she couldn't make the decision feel safe enough to make. You see, that's not a sales problem, that's a buyability problem. And if you sell B2B software into enterprise accounts, this might be the hidden reason your good deals keep slipping. So in this video, I want to break down the difference between software that is easy to use and software that is easy to buy, because those are not the same thing. And most growth stage startup companies are only solving for one of them. Now, most software companies pour everything into the product experience. Is it intuitive? Is the onboarding simple? Can users get value quickly? Is the UI clean? Is the workflow better than the old way? Those things matter a lot. But here's the problem. Enterprise software doesn't get bought just because the end user likes it. It gets bought when enough people inside the business believe three things. One, this problem matters now. Two, there's a painful cost if we do nothing. And three, this solution is worth the risk, budget, time, internal effort required to change. That is a completely different job than building a great product. And it's a different job than running a clean demo. The gap between those two jobs is exactly where good deals go quiet. And when this buyability gap is done well, seven-figure deals are the norm. And without it, getting ghosted is the norm. So your champion can love the product and still not be able to sell it internally. Not because they're a bad champion, but because you may never have given them a strong enough buying argument. Making your product more buyable is what this channel is all about. So here's the core distinction. A usable product answers the question, can the user get value from this? A buyable offer answers a different question. Can the business justify changing for this? And that's the gap. I think a lot of growth stage companies get stuck in that gap. Real product, real value, real customers may even have strong retention. When they try to move up market, they discover something painful. Enterprise buyers don't just need to understand what the product does. Honestly, they need to understand why the business should care enough to act. A good product creates value, but a buyable offer helps the buyer make a decision. And this is where sellers get it wrong. Because when deals stall, it's easy to blame the buyer. Oh, they're being slow. They don't get it. They're political. They're risk averse. They're dragging their feet. And yes, enterprise buying can be slow and messy. But I think a better starting point is actually empathy. You see, the buyer is not just spending money. They're risking credibility. If they sponsor the wrong software, they don't just lose budget. They may burn political capital. They may create work for their team. They may frustrate finance, IT, legal, procurement, and operations. They may have to explain to their boss why the expected ROI didn't show up. They may even be fired. And so when a buyer hesitates, it doesn't mean that they don't care. It may mean that the case just isn't strong enough yet. You see, the buying argument isn't clear enough. The consequence of doing nothing isn't painful enough. The internal story isn't repeatable enough. The proof isn't strong enough. But the offer may still be too feature-led to survive the internal buying process. And so the question isn't whether your buyer cares, it's whether you made it easy enough for them to act. Here's what it looks like in the real world. A software company says, we help revenue teams improve forecasting accuracy with AI-powered pipeline intelligence. And that may be true. It may even be a good product, but to an executive, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. First of all, who owns this problem? Why does this matter right now? What happens if they don't do anything? Why does it help the CFO trust the forecast? How does it help the CEO walk into board meetings more confident? You see, this feature-led version tells me what the product does, and it's true, and you spend a lot of time and effort on it. But the reality is that the buyable version shows me why the business should change. You see, feature clarity is not the same as buying clarity. Now let's compare it to the more buyable version. Instead of saying, we help revenue teams improve forecasting accuracy, AI-powered pipeline intelligence, you might say, we help B2B software companies reduce late quarter deal slippage by giving revenue leaders earlier visibility into deals that are real, which ones are stuck, and which ones need executive intervention before the quarter is already gone. Plus, when you do this well, we can pull forward an average of 10% of additional pipeline into each quarter. That's not perfect, don't get me wrong, but it's so much more buyable because you can see the business pain, late quarter deal slippage. You can see the executive owner, revenue leaders. You can see the timing problem before the quarter is already over. You can see the operating value, earlier visibility, better intervention, cleaner forecast confidence. And then the conversation can move from here's our AI-powered dashboard, of which they have plenty, to where are your revenue leaders getting surprised too late in the quarter? And what does that cost the business? That is a very different conversation, and it's focused on their business and where they're trying to go and the things that they care about. See, a buyable offer moves the conversation from product interest to business urgency. I've watched champions walk out of demos genuinely fired up and then go completely dark 2 weeks later. And this is usually why. One of the simplest tests I like to try is what I call the internal meeting test. After your demo, imagine your champion has 10 minutes with their CFO, CEO, executive team. 3 things are happening. First, you're not in the room. Second, your sales deck is not going to be presented perfectly. And 3, your rep is not going to be there either to add context. Your champion has to explain, what is the problem? Why does it matter? Why now? Why this? What happens if we do nothing? What would success look like? Why is this worth budget? Why is this worth taking attention away from our other priorities? Why can't we do this with what we already have? Notice none of these have to do with your product, its features, or its usability. It all has to do with their business. You see, if your champion can't explain those things clearly without you, the deal is fragile. Not because they're a bad champion, but because you may not have given them a strong enough reason to buy. The real test is not whether your buyer understands you when you're not in the room. The test is whether they can repeat the case when you're not in the room. The test is whether or not they understand why this should matter to an executive and be worth their effort and attention. And this gets worse when companies move up market because each group is asking a different question. So users are asking, will this help me? A manager asks, will this help my team? A champion asks, will this help me get promoted? An executive asks, will this move a business priority? A CFO asks, is it worth the money? IT asks, will it create risk? Procurement asks, is it priced accurately? So if your offer is just feature-led, you try to respond to each of those by stacking things up against what your product does, and it gets weaker every time you move to another room. But if your offer is outcome-led, this is what we're going for, and this is why it's relevant to the executive team, you'll find that it's internally repeatable and it gets stronger. Enterprise buying is not just one conversation, it's a chain of internal conversations, and we make that more powerful, we make that more likely when we make your offer more buyable. And so when I say buyability, this is what I mean. Buyability is the degree to which your software is easy for the buyer to understand, justify, fund, and defend internally. It's not just messaging, it's not just the sales process or positioning, it's really the connective tissue between your product, your offer, your proof, your business, and the buyer's internal decision process. Because the reality is everything that matters here is their business. And they're the ones taking on more risk if this goes south. Because the reality is if this goes well, you land an account and you get to grow. If it goes poorly, you lose an account and you get to move on elsewhere. If it goes poorly for them, your champion may be fired, a team may be compressed down, an executive may miss their targets and miss their bonus. Like, it's so much more risk on their end, and that's why we have to make several things clear. First, what is the problem we're solving? Second, who is the owner that cares about this? 3, what is the big business outcome that we're going to be targeting? 4th, what is the cost of doing nothing? Remember that status quo is our most likely competitor, not some other business widget AI platform out there. It's actually doing nothing is the biggest competitor or likely option to doing something with your business. And then number 5 is the proof that makes the decision feel safe enough to make. Where can you tell a case study of a lookalike business, someone who's similar to what they're doing, who's in a similar industry, where you can say, hey, we had this outcome. This is what we generated in 6 months or 6 weeks. We want to compress that time down as much as we can. And so if you think back to the champion who went quiet, she was missing all 5 of these. We had given so much about the features and the product and what was happening and how we were going to integrate it. We hadn't clarified the problem, the owner who cared, an executive who's going to get involved, a business outcome that we're actually going to channel towards, the cost of an action, or the proof that we could really deliver. And this is what so many software companies are missing today. You don't have a bad product, just underdeveloped the buying case. A good offer helps a buyer make progress on what they care about most. The problem is not always that the buyers don't get the product. Sometimes it's that the company has not made the decision easy enough to make. So if you're a founder, a CRO, a sales leader at a software company, and your product is strong, but deals keep stalling, I'd ask a different question. Not just do we need more pipeline, not just do our reps need better discovery, not just is our demo good enough. Those questions matter. But I'd also ask, can an executive understand the business case quickly? Can our champion repeat the story internally, and is the cost of an action clear? Because a lot of good software companies don't lose because they lack value. You lose because the value never became a buyable decision. If this landed, subscribe, because every video on this channel is built around one idea. How do we make good software easier to buy? This is how growth stage software companies turn feature-led products into outcome-led enterprise offers so they can create better executive conversations and more viable deals. In the next video, I'm going to go deeper into how we rebuilt a feature-led SaaS offer into an executive-grade outcome-based offer. And the next time you hit a roadblock, remember, your software may not be hard to use, it may be hard to buy.